Hi everyone, welcome back to Gcse Easy. Starting a new topic today, looking at infection response. Mainly looking at diseases, treatments, how vaccines work, how drugs are developed and things like that. But to start us off, I thought we'd have a look at pathogens. So we're going to be looking at what pathogens are, the different types of pathogens you need to know about, how we treat illnesses caused by these pathogens, and the symptoms of them as well. So as always, make sure you've grabbed yourself some paper, grab those pens, and follow along with me. Okay, let's start off with what pathogens are then. There are many terms people use when describing illness and what causes it. I'm sure you've heard of someone saying, oh, I've caught a bug that's going around, or don't eat that off the floor because it's covered in germs. But what does that actually mean in plain English? In biology, we use the term pathogen to describe any microorganisms that cause you to become unwell. Pathogens include more familiar organisms like bacteria and viruses, but also include funguses, so think of yeast, and another strange group called Protists. All of these pathogens can be spread from living thing to living thing. The posh science term we use for a disease you can get from someone else is called communicable. When you come across a new term in science, it's so useful to break the words down, so that way you can have the best guess at what they mean. So when I look at communicable, I think of communi. Communi makes me think of the word community, and a community is a group of people that interact. So if one person gets ill, they can spread it to others. So therefore, using my logic, communicable has to mean an illness that's easily spread. Diseases that are easy to spread, such as the common cold, or more recently COVID-19, are called highly infectious. Let's start by having a look at viruses then. Viruses come in many shapes or varieties. We call these strains. So you might have heard there's multiple flu strains this year. That just means there's multiple types of flu virus about. You may be familiar with the HIV virus. We'll get onto that later this lesson. Ebola is another virus which has been made infamous by the Ebola outbreak back in 2014 to 2016 in West Africa, claiming 11,000 people's lives. Adenovirus is another type of virus that I'm sure you've had or come across before, as it's the most common one that causes chest infections and sore throats. Bacteriophages are really, really weird. They look like something out of a sci-fi novel or something that, came down from space. Or for the nerds among us, their shape actually inspired the design for the injectors, or the kindergarten injectors in Steven Universe. In biology, the term phage means eating or to eat. So if we take the term bacteriophage, it makes sense that bacteriophages target and destroy bacteria. Now, viruses are a bit of a scientific odd one out. They're not technically alive, as they don't do all the 7 Mrs. Gren life processes like all living things do, but they can respire and reproduce by copying themselves, so they're sort of somewhere between being alive and dead. Viruses are also mind-bogglingly small. It's hard to get a sense of scale from drawing, but if you imagine one regular old animal cell, bacteria would be roughly the size of mitochondria, and a virus would be barely noticeable in comparison. The largest viruses, such as the common flu virus, is 0.0001 millimeters long. To get a sense of the size of that, if you imagine dividing a 1 millimeter part of your roulette by 10,000, one of those 10,000 divisions would be the size of a flu virus. On the other side of things, though, the smallest viruses are as small as 0.0000025 millimeters long. In case you still can't quite picture how small viruses are, if you were to take a standard red blood cell, remember you need a microscope to see red blood cells, it would be as tall as 70,000 flu viruses stacked on top of each other. So how do viruses actually make us feel ill? Viruses aren't alive, so there's nothing they really want from us, except for our beautiful, beautiful DNA, which they need to make copies of themselves. When a virus gets into your body and comes in contact with a cell, it's going to enter the cell through the cell membrane and then start using the genetic material inside, so that your DNA, combined with some of its own RNA, to start forcing your cell to make copies of the virus. So your cells turn into basically little biological photocopying machines. The cells keep copying the virus over and over again until it gets so full that the cell bursts, spilling all the viruses into the surroundings. This is what causes you damage and makes you feel unwell. So when you've got a sore throat, the reason it's sore is because those cells are being destroyed by viruses, being blown up, for lack of a better term. These new viruses then enter new cells, and the cycle continues until your immune system comes along to deal with it. Because viruses hide inside your cells though, it makes it much harder for white blood cells or other medicines to reach and destroy the virus. That's why there's not so many antiviral medicines as there are antibiotics. Another virus that you probably heard of is called measles. Measles is a disease caused by the highly infectious virus called, you guessed it, the measles virus. Measles is easily passed on as it hangs around in the mucus and fluids that an infected person will produce when they cough or sneeze. The droplets containing the virus are then breathed in or picked up and transferred to someone who is healthy, making them ill. The main symptoms of measles are a red rash on the skin, usually starts in the forehead, a cough, a sore throat, as well as really sore red eyes. Measles is much more common in young children and toddlers, so children are often vaccinated against measles, amongst other things. They have what's called the MMR jab, the measles, mumps and rubella jab, about 1 year old. We'll cover the ins and outs of what vaccines are and how they work in a future lesson. But for now, if you're vaccinated against measles when you're young, it just means you can't catch measles. Your body has become immune. Your body can fight off the measles virus before it can even make you ill. Anyone who's not vaccinated against measles, be them young or old, can catch measles and become unwell because of it if they come into contact with someone who's recently had measles, or they are around someone that's been near someone with measles and they've not washed their clothes, similar to sort of the cautions you'd have to take against COVID. HIV is another virus with a large and very well-deserved reputation. HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus. Immuno is a term we use when talking about the immune system in biology, and deficiency just means something's missing or lacking. So immunodeficiency must mean that HIV damages the immune system in some way. When the HIV virus has damaged the immune system over a number of years, the immune system can become so weak that you're unable to fight off common infections that would usually not do you much harm. So things like getting a cold can lead to pneumonia, which can then kill you. If you've reached the stage where your immune system has become so weakened due to HIV virus, you have a condition known as AIDS. AIDS stands for something else. It stands for Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. So acquired just means you don't get it naturally or you haven't made it yourself. Immune deficiency means the immune system's lacking or the immune system's damaged. And syndrome usually means in medicine negative effects working together. So it's the overall negative effect of your immune system being damaged because of a virus that you haven't made naturally. So how do you get a HIV infection? HIV has many myths surrounding it, especially with how it's spread from person to person. All HIV is passed on when body fluids are transmitted or mixed. So things like blood, semen, vaginal fluid. There are very small trace amounts of HIV virus in things like saliva, but it is in such small numbers that you would have to, glug a few litres of someone's spit straight from their mouth in order to even have a risk of catching HIV. So HIV can be passed on in a number of ways. So through sexual activity, by having HIV positive blood enter your body through a cut, or by injecting it. So people that often are HIV positive and are drug addicts that share needles because they don't have access to clean ones can spread HIV through sharing needles. HIV can also be passed through breast milk to young children, and most unfortunately it can also pass between a mother and their unborn child through the placenta. So some babies are unfortunately born with HIV. However, you cannot get HIV in the following ways, and these are all actual myths that people believed at one time or another. You cannot get HIV from kissing someone that's HIV positive, sharing a toothbrush with someone that's HIV positive, swimming in the same swimming pool as someone with HIV, hugging or shaking hands with someone that has HIV, and you cannot get HIV from things like mosquitoes and other blood-sucking insects. Okay, that's viruses out of the way, so let's have a look in depth at our next pathogen, bacteria. So before we delve into some of the nastier varieties of bacteria, I feel it's my sworn duty to tell you about some of the more interesting and friendlier bacterial buddies you have living inside you right now in your digestive system. First, we've got Bifidobacterium, a strange twiglet-looking bacteria which not only keeps harmful bacteria away, but also helps make vitamins you can't make yourself. Lactobacilli are also very kind and sweet. They help to make other vitamins that we can't make on our own. Another more famous type of bacteria, it's called E. coli. It comes in many different varieties and strains. It's thought that each person has their own sort of special, unique assortment of bacterial types in their gut. These helpful little E. coli buddies make vitamin K for you. Without vitamin K, your blood would not be able to clot properly. So next time you cut yourself and form a scab, give a moment of thanks to those E. coli in your digestive system. However, there are some less friendly strains of E. coli that can make you feel really unwell, so evil twins exist in the bacterial world as well as the human world. Bacteria just see us humans as walking all-you-can-eat buffet/holiday resorts. The warm, damp and food-rich environments our bodies provide is absolutely perfect for bacteria to be able to reproduce. Like viruses, they make copies of themselves, but they don't need our DNA to do it. When bacteria grow and compete with each other for space and nutrients, they release toxins. Now, these toxins might not affect the bacteria itself, but because toxins are toxic, poisonous, they do cause damage to our cells. So this is what most often leads to you feeling very unwell. So if you were to get a infection of E. coli, for example, from eating some dodgy beef, you would start vomiting because the toxins are making you throw up. Now, there are two bacterial illnesses you need to go away and learn. The first is Salmonella, which is best known for causing food poisoning. If you've ever eaten a dodgy takeaway or regretted reheating that 3-day-old pizza, you have Salmonella to thank for that. You can become infected with Salmonella through eating undercooked food, especially meat, eating food that's prepared in unhygienic conditions, or improperly reheating food. Symptoms of Salmonella poisoning or food poisoning include vomiting, diarrhea, stomach cramps and fever. You can treat Salmonella by sort of keeping the symptoms to a minimum, so, replacing lost fluids when people are throwing up, trying to have small amounts of food just to keep your strength up. But food poisoning sorts it out in a few days of good rest. To try and reduce the risk of people contracting Salmonella from food, chickens are often vaccinated for Salmonella, similar to how we're vaccinated for diseases. So this means there's less chance of that Salmonella being in the meat or in the eggs when you go and buy them. The second of our bacterial baddies is gonorrhea, a very common STI, sexually transmitted infection. In fact, it's so common that there were 56,259 cases of gonorrhea in the UK alone in 2018. Gonorrhea is an STI, so it is spread through people having sex, especially those who are not using barrier methods of protection. The symptoms of gonorrhea, which you need to learn, are pain when urinating and, get ready folks, this is going to be bad, thick yellow or green discharge from the penis or vagina. If gonorrhea is left untreated, it can cause some really nasty secondary effects, such as infertility, which means you can't have children in both men and women, secondary infections in other parts of the body, so it can spread to your joints. Babies born to mothers with gonorrhea can also suffer from other complications, such as blindness and skin infections during birth. Gonorrhea is really easily treated with antibiotics, and antibiotics are just medicines that kill bacteria. However, in more recent years, many antibiotics have become less and less effective due to something called antibiotic resistance, and we'll talk about how antibiotic resistance happens later in a topic. But this just, in short, means if one type of antibiotics doesn't treat gonorrhea anymore, you have to find or make a whole new type of antibiotics. Next, we're going to have a look at a less well-known pathogen called fungi. When you think of fungi, you probably picture mushrooms or mould. The fungi that cause your infections and the type you might eat with a fry-up in the morning are similar organisms. They are both in the fungi kingdom, same as, us and fish and birds are all in the animal kingdom. Fungi that can harm us are known as pathogenic fungi. These fungi are microscopic and often look more like yeast than mushrooms. They grow in small little colonies just like bacteria, love those damp, dark and nutrient-rich parts of our body where they can reproduce and live in peace. Common fungal infections you've probably heard of are thrush and athlete's foot. So thrush is an infection of primarily the mouth, but you can get thrush in any orifices. An orifice just means an opening, so you can get oral thrush, you can get vaginal thrush, you can get thrush in your anal region, anywhere that is sort of damp and dark. Thrush shows up as a yellowish, whitish sort of film that coats the tongue if you've got a oral thrush infection. It causes pain when swallowing, as well as cracked, red, sore skin around the mouth. The patches on the tongue are actually the colonies of the fungi themselves, and that pain and discomfort from swallowing, as well as the sort of red, cracked lips, comes from the chemicals the fungi make to feed when they grow. Some more fungi fiends are those that cause athlete's foot and fungal nail infections. I remember a good advert from when I was young talking about criminals, so that was to a fungal nail infection. Athlete's foot is caused by an infection of fungus growing between your toes and on your feet, especially if you often wear shoes and do sports, because you're going to be making sweaty, warm conditions for those funguses. So this just leads to itchy patches of red, sore skin. If the fungus infects the nail, it can lead to becoming thickened, yellow and crusty. Ugh. Luckily, both can be treated fairly easy with fungicidal creams or sprays. Cide in science just means killer, so, fungicide is going to be killer of fungus. Our last pathogen is the protist. The most famous protist, and the one you need to learn about for your exams, is the protist that causes malaria. You may already know that malaria is passed on by mosquito bites, but many people wrongly think that it's the mosquitoes themselves that cause malaria. The truth is that mosquitoes are just taxis for the real culprit, the protists. Animals such as mosquitoes that carry the disease or the disease-causing organism but aren't affected by it themselves are called vectors. Last year alone, there were 228 million cases of malaria, mostly in areas of Africa where conditions are really nice and warm for mosquitoes to live and breed. There is worry that as the climate warms up, the species of mosquito that can carry malaria are going to start to move further up and into, parts of Europe and Britain. But for now, we're relatively safe. People who get malaria suffer from high fevers, vomiting, headache, and loss of energy. And malaria, if you don't treat it, can be fatal. There's no vaccine for malaria currently, so the number of cases is mainly controlled by preventing people from coming into contact with mosquitoes. So using insect repellent, making sure arms are covered so mosquitoes can't bite you as easily, using mosquito nets at night, destroying places where mosquitoes can lay eggs. They love water, so any areas of sort of standing gross water is like a incubator for mosquito larvae. There are also medicines you can take. So if you've ever been to a country that has malaria, you might have taken these anti-malarial pills. The anti-malarial pills are just a chemical that kills any protists that do, unfortunately, slip through the barrier into your blood. So how do you get a malaria infection then? Firstly, you need to be exposed to the vector, so the mosquitoes. It's only the females that feed on blood, if you didn't know. The males feed on nectar. The reason the females need your blood is there's a chemical in your blood, or protein, I believe. I might be wrong though. There is something in the blood that they need in order to mature their eggs. So we are part of the mosquito's life cycle. When a mosquito bites you, it actually spits up some of its own saliva into the wound. This saliva contains a couple of chemicals. One of them stops your blood from clotting, so the blood can flow nicely. And it's also a sort of mild anaesthetic in there as well. So that stops you feeling the bite, or you don't notice the mosquito's there until it's done with its business and it's flown off. When the mosquito does this spitting part, the plasmids that are inside its stomach and mouth actually gets released into the bloodstream as well. Once they're in your blood, the protist cells will then head to your liver and enter your cells in your liver. All your blood will at some point go through your liver, so it's just a matter of time for them to get there really. Once they're inside these liver cells, they change slightly and mature and then start to copy themselves, so reproduce asexually. Just like viruses do, they divide and divide and divide and divide until the cell is so full of protist cells that it bursts, and all those little protists are spilled out into the body. These new protists then seek out red blood cells and enter them. Then the plasmids do something really weird. Some of them will become female gametes, so sort of like an egg cell, and some of them will become male gametes, kind of like protist sperm, and they will stay inside red blood cells, just going through the circulatory system until a mosquito comes along and they get sucked up. So they're sort of lying in wait, ready for the next taxi to come and pick them up. Other protists that aren't turning male and female will enter red blood cells and carry on dividing like they did in the liver cells. If your red blood cells aren't functioning, you can't carry as much oxygen around your body and you can't carry out respiration, so you feel tired. The next time a mosquito feeds on the infected person, some of those blood cells with the protists inside of them get sucked up. Once they get into the digestive system mosquito, they will leave the cells, and then the male and female protists will fuse. It's kind of like sexual reproduction, the sperm and an egg fuse, and then it makes an embryo. Then these new baby protists hang out in the mosquito's mouth and digestive system until it reaches another person and spits them out, and the cycle continues. Right, thank you so much for making it this far into the video, all the way to the end. I do really appreciate the effort put in. Make sure, in terms of revision and your learning, you can nail these things. You know what a pathogen is, you know what communicable means in terms of diseases, you know what highly infectious is, you can name illnesses caused by the 4 main pathogens, the symptoms of them and an idea of how they're treated, and you know how bacteria make you feel ill and how viruses make you feel ill. Next time we get together, we'll be looking at defences your body has to fight off and stop all of these nasties from making you ill.